Chapter 34. Gloves Come Off. Superman had not had a good time since his last conversation with Justinian. The League had been in a massive upheaval about what to do with Justinian. Several wanted to consider him a threat on the level of Darkseid. At first, the League didn't consider him a threat because he had made it clear he was uninterested in ruling Earth. However, he took over Mars, forcing the white Martian race under his heel. Martians in general were one of the few races in the universe that could not only hurt Kryptonians, but also match them. However, every time Justinian showed up on Earth, he was stronger, and so was his army. Even now, the best magic users on Earth all were saying that Mars was placed under an illusion. Something major had and was happening on the Red Planet, but even now, they could not find out what. Though the magic users the League did discuss all said the same thing. Justinian was not using magic in the way of order. He was not asking or exchanging for it. He was forcing it to do his bidding like the way of chaos. That did not look good, and then was the fact that Justinian had a pact with Clarion the Witch Boy. The Lord of Chaos would have to do anyone favor Justinian had no matter what. It could truly be anything, and in the hands of someone like Justinian, it could be worse than what Clarion would do on a normal day. Even now, thanks to his super hearing, when he focused on it, could hear nearly everything happening on Earth. Every scream for help, every crime, and despite his great power, he was just one man. Some may think him a god among men, but he was still a man. He couldn't use magic like Justinian. He couldn't use psychic abilities like him, either two abilities. He was as defenseless as a regular human. It happened rarely, but he had been brainwashed on several occasions and only brought back by the League. If he had to face Justinian alone, he felt he would lose to his magic, psychic, and even his odd ability to endlessly double and divide his and others' powers. That made the Custodes a lethal opponent, and even his tech was beyond anything of the current period. John said that trying to read Justinian's mind was like trying to connect his mind to a burning sun. Even worse was that the Batcomputer had been hacked, and all of Batman's contingencies were stolen. Every member of the League, and their weaknesses are in the hands of a terrifying warlord like Justinian. Even worse was how open Justinian was with his godlike powers. With a wave of his hand, he sized up Mars and Phobos, making it slightly larger than Earth. Scientists and world leaders were in a panic at that action. Even now, when he focused, he could hear all the rapid discussions in the scientific community about what the repercussions of Justinian's actions would cause in the long run. Superman opened his eyes and pulled his hearing back as he sat at the dinner table. Lois looked at her husband before reaching out and holding his hand. "I know that look, you're troubled." Clark nodded. It is Justinian all over again. Ever since he arrived in 21st century, everything has been about him. Batman and several members of the League want us to take the fight to him and find a way to send him back to the 41st millennium. The problem is, how do we do that? Lois pulled out her phone, which was far more modern than what was expected for 2003. More importantly, the video that had been taken when Justinian fought Clarion. She had written a piece on Justinian for the Daily Planet after that fight. "Think you can take him, Smallville?" He smiled at her pet name, but he honestly didn't know anymore. "Possibly. While I am not resistant to magic or psychic energy, I am still made of harder stuff. If Justinian does move against Earth, I and the League will stop him." Lois turned off the video as something told her fighting Justinian would be just as brutal as Darkseid. She remembered the pain that the League felt to push him back. It would be the same if not worse. For all our sakes, let us hope you're right. Batman was having it even worse than Superman at the moment as he tried to find out how Justinian hacked the Batcomputer. He typed away at the supercomputer trying to find a way. Cyborg was here with him trying to find out, as well as Batman's tech was hard to hack. They wanted to know how Justinian made it past all of the firewalls, but suddenly all of the cameras in Blackgate and Arkham went down at the same time. Victor hummed as he tried to find out what had happened to cause all of Bruce's cameras and other techs to go down at the same time. Bruce squinted his eyes as he began to type away at the Batcomputer. Just as he was typing the screen of the Batcomputer, Justinian lifted his arm and pushed a button on his gauntlet. Instantly, the magical tech virus he had uploaded to the Batcomputer caused it to start to not only crash, but also begin to mutate into a mechanical horror. He had effectively created an obliterator virus that affected the Batcomputer. Cyborg, who had been hooked up to the Batcomputer, was almost infected, but he cut the link just in time. He raised his arm and formed his arm cannon before blasting the computer several times to kill it. Batman had thrown explosive batarangs at it, making sure it was dead. Damien, who had been watching, blinked a few times. What just happened? Before Batman could answer, a magic projection of Justinian formed. He was still sitting on his throne, but this time Rimnosh and Laurelina were not on his lap. Justinian had his helmet on his lap as a small smile covered his face. "How did you like my gift?" Batman grit his teeth so hard he almost cracked them. "You." Justinian sat back on his throne with his 50 burning Martian honor guards standing around him. "If you want someone to blame, blame yourself. You're still trying to find a weakness, trying to come up with a contingency for me. I thought my warning you the last time would be enough, but it was not. So take this as me taking a hard stance on it. Stop trying, Bruce. Just stop before you end up dead." When the communication ended, Batman clenched his fists as he stood up. "Victor, call the League. We're going to Arkham and Blackgate." The Shapers, to keep the League out, made the bounded fields extra tough. The Terminators were on a time crunch, and they were not going to be slow. Not only was Arkham Asylum being raided, but one of the free attack groups of Terminator elites was sent to Blackgate for some of the more inmates that could be of use. At Arkham, inside the bounded field that had been set up, the security that had been placed to keep the insane inmates locked up was fighting for their lives. Behind one of the Wayne Tech force field generators, several of them were armed with heavy weapons meant to punch through heavy armor. However, as had been seen before, their weapons could not so much get past the force fields from the Crux Terminatus that had covered each battle brother in the most durable of shields. As these humans prepared to hold their position, a team of 5 Terminators came into view. Shivering, one of them pushed a switch that caused several turrets to come down from the ceiling. A hail of gunfire coming from the Wayne Tech turrets began to unleash a hailstorm of armor-piercing rounds at the Marines. Without even bothering to dodge as the shells burned up in the shields of the Terminator plate, the leading battle brother looked up. Behind his helmet, his eyes began to burn like fire before he unleashed his heat vision. The rays of heat were drawn into the crystalline structure of his Terminator's eye sockets. The enchanted transparisteel enhanced his heat vision before he unleashed it, destroying the turrets. The Terminators continued to move forward before running into a force field generator. Without missing a beat, one of the Terminators activated the matter disruption field on his lightning claw and sliced the shield into ribbons. "Fire!" The guard began to fire their weapons, which were as good as pea shooters. With swiping light power claws, the guard were killed before they could scream. "Keep moving." Familiar last stands were happening around the asylum as the Martian Marines could track all through their technology, psychic, and magical means. In a matter of minutes, all 150 Marines began to gather at the inmate holding cells after they had butchered the last of the guards. As for the doctors, orderlies, and nurses, they had been captured alive to be handed over to Justinian. He had said he needed more test subjects, and these humans would do nicely. They even collected the corpses as well to be used for the Emperor's cloning experiments. While outwardly they were silent, through their psychic net they were buzzing with words. "Captain, we have killed every one of the defenders and captured the living. We made sure to not leave a trace of our actions." The captain leading this assault didn't turn around as he responded. "Excellent work. The fewer traces we leave, the better. Now, here we are." As they moved, the inmates of Arkham began to back away, as even if they were insane, they still didn't want to die. The captain opened his hand and projected images of the ones that had been targeted. These are the targets. When their images were seen, Victor Freeze, Killer Croc, Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, and Man-Bat all began to worry. Before they could do anything else, one of the inmates began to talk. "Hey, you robotic bastards, why do you want Sweet Ivy?" They all turned to the inmate in question, who was a female. One of the Terminators walked over as he was part of the previous White Martian attack on Earth. "I know this one, Harley Quinn, the crazy maid of the Joker." "Hey, I ain't crazy." She was ignored as the captain shifted his right arm a bit. His custom storm bolter clicked as the safety turned off. Seeing what was going to happen, Ivy, who was the target, spoke up. Wait, let her live. You want to take me alive, right? I will kill myself if she is harmed. The captain turned to their war shaper, who read their minds. The female has been in a relationship in the past. She speaks true. The Emperor would need the green one. With a snarl, the captain walked away. Take the bitch alive. The shaper waved his staff and forced all of them unconscious. With them out, they were collected, and to not let the others go to waste, the rest of the inmates were taken as well. If they were useless, they could at least be used for the experiments at the institutes. Once they had their loot, the Terminators left the asylum before they destroyed it with a magic barrage, leaving no traces of their attack. The Shaper then opened a portal back to Mars and brought down the bounded field. A few minutes after the field went down and Batman arrived in the Batplane at what remained of Arkham Asylum. When he saw what was left, he knew that Justinian had been behind it. At Blackgate, Cyborg had arrived, and much like Arkham, only a burning pit remained of Blackgate. When he saw the destruction, he knew that Justinian had officially stopped playing nice for some reason. That cannot be good. At Cadmus, the same fate of Blackgate and Arkham had happened. The Terminators had moved in with brutal efficiency. After killing the U.S. troop station at Cadmus, they had taken the scientists alive along with their xenomorphs. In the deepest section of Cadmus, they had found 3 special clones. 2 male clones that looked like Superman and a female one. These were seen as extremely valuable and taken back to Mars by the Emperor. At the League of Assassins, the Terminators had moved to the League's secret sacred city of Ethal-Theben. The city was guarded by magical means and technology, but even with those in place, the Terminators got in anyway. The assassins of the city had fought tooth and nail to keep them out, but the deadliness of Martians was revealed. Even outside of their power armor, they could match a Kryptonian. With that in mind, their war shapers had taken this assault more seriously and used magic to reduce as much damage to the city as possible. Eventually, they managed to get to Ras Al Ghul and take him alive. As for the Lazarus Pit, the shapers left it as it was, but they did drain it dry. The other attack groups had moved to Slade's secret compound, and after killing his men, they captured him alive as well. The rest of the assault groups had finished killing the leaders of Russia, China, North Korea, Malaysia, India, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Bialya, Markovia, and Santa Prisca. With them dead, they brought in some Martians to take the place of the dead leaders. Very soon, Justinian would begin diplomatic meetings with them, allowing him to set up his armies on Terra legally. Though, as much as he didn't want to, he was one day going to invade Themyscira. It would break his friendship with Diana, but he needed the mother box they held. Atlantis held another, and the humans simply hid it away. Mother boxes that he could fuse with his armor. Justinian on Mars opened his glowing eyes with a grim cold look on his face. Fuck the Justice League. He held his helmet before he focused on the pact he had with Clarion. Clarion, at his words, the Lord of Chaos arrived in his throne room. He still looked like a young boy with black horns on his head and Tickle the cat in his arms. You rang. I did. I know how I will use my favor. Just be ready for it. So you call me for nothing? Sigismund pulled his black sword from its sheath and held the giant blade at Clarion's neck. Watch your tone. Clarion smirked as he looked up at Sigismund. Temper now. Don't make me turn you into a frog. Justinian waved his hand and had Sigismund disengage. Just be ready for it, Clarion. You will help me invade Earth. I know just the ritual for you to cast. I will make it fun. Now you got my attention. I can't wait to hear it. See you then, big guy. When Clarion was gone, Justinian smiled as Lords of Chaos lived to cause chaos. His plan was for Clarion to send all the adults to another dimension, leaving the kids behind. That way, he could take control of Terra with the kids as hostages. Then, he could take complete control of Terra, the cradle of mankind. Then, he would take control of the entire solar system before letting the League and the adults return. A good start. CH, 35 clones and benefits. In Justinian's throne room, he was sitting on his throne with his helmet resting on his armrest. He had his eyes open as he looked directly at Earth as the League was gathering at Gotham since he had destroyed Arkham and Blackgate. While he didn't admit it was him destroying the Batcomputer right after the cameras and trackers that Batman had in those places went down put most of the blame on him. Then again, it was not like he was hiding his activities from the League, just as he thought that he sensed that his Terminators had returned to Mars. Of course, not all 3,000 would be coming to address him, so instead the captains of the 150 attack groups had moved to meet him at Cadia in his throne room. They had brought with them the specific targets he had requested. All the other humans alive and dead from Arkham and Blackgate had been locked away in a prison realm or storage that Justinian had ordered built. The atmosphere was better suited to baseline humans who would die from the psi magic flowing through Mars. As for the ones that got dragged to Justinian's throne room, they were Poison Ivy, Killer Croc, Victor Fries, Scarecrow, and Man-Bat. They were not alone, as with them was Ra's al Ghul and Slade Wilson, just who Justinian wanted to see. Even he felt forced to ignore them when he saw 3 capsules containing 3 Kryptonian clones. Match, Superboy, and Galatea. 3 Superman clones, which means Kryptonian DNA. Justinian walked past each of his demanded targets for different reasons. Using the DNA of Man-Bat, he could make his own vampires, and Killer Croc would help in making his own lizard men or dragon men. Victor Fries was a genius in cold technology, so after saving his wife, he could gain the man's loyalty, if not respect. As for Ivy, she was currently looking up at the gigantic Justinian. She had never seen him before, but he was 12 feet tall and covered in a dark purple shimmering armor that gave her the creeps. Something about it felt like she was being watched by powerful predators. Something about how he looked at them all was like he saw them not as people, but as mere ingredients. She didn't like that look, but he walked over to her directly. He kneeled and grabbed her head and began to look at her carefully. She began to feel him enter her mind through potent psychic abilities. At the same time, he used his biomancy to learn how her DNA worked. Poison Ivy was almost similar to the orcs, but rather than being part fungus, she was just part plant. It was a misconception, but mushrooms were not plants. He could think of a few ways to use her DNA to make his crocs truly self-reliant like the funny orcs. As for reading her memories, he just wanted to know what made her tick. Curious. Seems that I could use you after all. From her body, potent pheromones began to be released as she tried to call to Justinian's lust. In more ways than one, yes? I could be a very useful girl. He snorted as he couldn't be seduced through drugs. Already his potent perpetual, dragon, and Custodes genetics were purging outside influence in his body. Stop with the pheromones before I send you into a lightless realm and let you wither to death. That made her stop, as without sunlight she would die. I will talk to you in a bit. I have more important things to do. Ivy was honestly not expecting that as few men or women could resist her. Rather, Justinian walked over to Slade, who was in his set of armor minus his mask. Where's his mask? I have it here, my Emperor. One of his captains walked over to him still in Terminator plate before handing the mask over. Justinian scanned the mask because it was another DC artificial material, Promethium. In 40K, it was flamer fuel, but in DC it was armor. Tell me, Slade, do you know why I want to track you down? Slade spat blood as he had been impaled on a pair of lightning claws and then stepped on. Only thanks to his regeneration was he still alive, but he preferred to not have lost everything to these aliens. No, your men were tight-lipped. Justinian nodded as he looked down at Slade Wilson, his favorite Batman villain when he was a kid. It is because of your blood. Slade smirked when he heard that. What? Plan to drain me dry and recreate the serum that made me superhuman. Justinian snorted as he looked at Ra's next to Slade. Both men were not fans of each other, as Slade was still bitter at the fact that Ra's chose Batman over him to succeed him. I can and will do just that, but that is not the main reason. I needed a suitable genetic source from which to produce an army of clones. At first, I thought an army of clones of you would be enough, but seeing Ra's here made me change my thoughts. By splicing your DNA with some of that Kryptonian DNA, I now have access to with those 3 clones. I know my future armies will be truly lethal. Laurelina, take all of them to my lab, except Victor Fries and Ivy. I can do that, my king. Hearing her words, Scarecrow, who was just here because Justinian wanted the formula for fear toxin, began to try to appeal to Justinian. Wait, I can be useful. I can manufacture fear toxin for you. I will teach you my methods. Remnosh scoffed, as they didn't need him. We could just read your mind. That is the only reason you are here. Laurelina, take them. With a smile on her face, Laurelina waved her hand and forced all of the prisoners that Justinian designated unconscious. Once they were out, using telekinesis, she dragged away Killer Croc, Scarecrow, Slade, Roz, leaving Victor Fries and Poison Ivy behind. When Laurelina teleported away, that just left the two former scientists now mutated by their experiments. In Victor's case, he could not survive unless his body remained in his suit, which kept him at freezing. They had not removed his suit, but they had taken all his weapons. When only the two of them remained, Justinian sat on his throne before looking at them both. While I took the others for my cloning experiments, I took you two for very different reasons. Victor, I read your mind, your wife Nora Fries, and how you live your life to try to cure her by any means. Of course, I can say your methods were rather crude, but I can see how a human like you would get attached to her with your short life. Victor looked up at Justinian past his contained cryogenic suit. Let me guess, in the future, they have the cure for my beloved Nora? Of course, with a simple wave of my hand, I could cure even the worst illness in a matter of moments. If I wanted, I could turn you two into normal humans, but not yet. I have no reason to do that. Instead, I will do this. Justinian looked through Victor's memories from the moment of his birth to this moment and learned something. Titus, go to Earth and get me his wife. Justinian transferred the locations to Titus' mind, who instantly teleported in a flash of flames to Victor's lab. Seeing that made Victor struggle against his bindings. Stop! Leave Nora out of this! Justinian ignored him as Titus returned in a few moments with Nora in a cryogenic chamber. Justinian waved his hand and instantly cured her disease with biomancy, but he did not release her to Fries. Instead, he shrunk Nora's chamber into the size of a soda can. When he held it in his hand, Victor could see the godlike indifference in Justinina's glowing eyes. To Justinian, this was just a means to an end that would not last longer than a few years. To Fries, it was like an uncaring god gave you what you wanted a cost greater than what was given. He slumped down as he released a defeated sigh. What do you want? Justinian smirked, revealing his amusement at all of this. Simply put, you shall join my science institute and continue your work. Sure, technology from the 41st millennium is powerful, but one can always try to improve. Take him to his new laboratory and keep a close eye on him. One of the Terminators in his room picked up Fires by his chains and dragged him off. That just left Poison Ivy, who from the look of it was getting worried being around all these giants. Justinian wasn't even the tallest, as some of his honor guards were 15 feet tall. He was only 12 feet tall, and the Terminators were all 10 feet. All right, I did bring you alive for a good reason. I need your power over plants. You see, this is Mars, and I have ordered my Martians to begin a plant forest, and the trees are growing, but having someone who is an avatar of the green would be useful. You could promote the growth of plant life throughout my planet. Of course, I could be more lenient with you if you sign this. Justinian waved his hand and showed her the soul contracts he was fond of using. It was written in High Gothic, so she didn't even know what she would be signing. What is this? A soul contract, by signing that I will hold ownership of your soul. Ivy instantly shook her head as she was not going to become a slave. I won't. I have no idea what else is in here. Justinian raised his hand, and a golden purple flame began to burn in his hands. He was mixing Draig's and Albion's dragon god-level flames and venom. Even Justinian's honor guard felt horror as they backed away from their master. The only exception was Remnosh and Laurelina, who had come back. When she saw the display, she smiled and she began to scribble in her Bible once again. All right, I understand. Guess I will just erase your soul and all. Justinian launched the ball of flames at Ivy, who in terror screamed as she placed her hand on the floating soul contract. I will sign. I will sign. The flames fluttered out before they touched her, leaving Justinian rather amused. Good. Someone take her away. Take her to the farming dimensions to see what positive changes she can make. This time, the remaining 9 captains bowed in their Terminator plate before they dragged Ivy away with them. When they were gone, Justinian stood up from his throne. Once again, I am reminded how much fear can be a weapon. Conrad Kurz was right in a sense. He even had a Conrad in his honor guard, but the guy in question wasn't as sadistic as the Night Haunter. Now that he thought about it, he looked at his honor guard more closely. When his honor guard numbered 40, including Remnash and Laurelina, there were only 5 females in his honor guard. Now that number had gone up to 7, but that joining his honor guard was all about talent and potential. If they were in his honor guard, they damn well deserved to be in it. Follow me, all of you. All of his 50 burning Martians began to follow Justinian as he teleported them all to his genetic laboratory. When they all arrived at the giant lab, where several monsters floated in alchemical fluid. In one section of the giant lab were large green humanoids. Those were his Krorks. He made them by refining the DNA of green Martians and white Martian elites together. Through biomancy, he edited the genomes of both to create his Crocs. Of course, he still had not started working on his Eldar, but he could use Slade, Ras, and Zatanna's DNA when he got it to create a race of magic super soldiers. He would need to make sure they were controlled, just like his Marines, so there would be no betrayal. All right, the reason I called you here is because of this. He pointed at the 3 Kryptonian clones in their pods. I will now upgrade us all. I will refine Kryptonian DNA to a pure state and remove its weaknesses before adding it to your genomes. I will do the same to myself, and I will also add your pure burning Martian genes to myself. That should give us an edge over anyone in the future, because we're all going to be fighting a war for the galaxy, meaning the Guardians and their lanterns will fall. His honor guard knew what the Guardians did to their race in the distant past. If not for their master, Justinian, they would be weak. Laurelina placed her hand over her heart with a smile on her face. My Emperor, your will is the will of the divine. Whatever you desire, we strive to achieve. Remnash nodded. What she said, do what you need to do. One by one, Sigismund, Helbrecht, Logan, Titus, Dorn, and the rest all nodded and kneeled to him. With a grin, Justinian approached the Kryptonian pods, as it was time to get to work making his honor guard as dangerous as possible. When he was done, his burning Martian would not only be one-man armies, but nearly unbeatable. Ch. 36, a dark plan. Once his honor guard supplied him with their blood for him to work with, he got to work. In his cloning lab, he also had Slade, Roz, Manbat, Scarecrow, and Killer Croc piled into a corner unconscious. He ignored them as he pulled out the 3 clones from their pods, but he kept them unconscious through his psychic abilities. Kryptonians were very weak to psychic attacks, even more so than magic. Once they were out, he strapped them to medical tables after feeding them a potion made by his alchemists to promote blood recovery. He also gave them a vitality potion that would prevent the clones from dying from lack of vitality from their blood. He then hooked their veins to machines that would extract their blood for him. After scanning the clones, he learned what he expected. The first clone, Match, was made with pure Kryptonian DNA from Superman, but there were genetic gaps since humans didn't fully understand Kryptonian DNA. The next clone, Superboy, or Connor Kent, was the clone that had the gaps in the DNA filled with human DNA. Lex Luthor's DNA was amusing in the sense that Superman and Lex had a child together before Lois Lane. He almost laughed at the humor in it, but he ignored it. As a result of the human DNA in Connor's DNA, he lacked some of the Kryptonian abilities of Match. As for Galatea, the female clone of Supergirl possibly, her DNA was far more stable and contained very little human in it. By taking the genes in all 3 and refining the DNA through his biomancy, he could not only fill in the gaps, but make pure, stable DNA. Of course, once he had refined the blood, he then went back again using all his other techniques. His Psymagic, his genetic engineering to begin to remove all of the undead aspects, such as a weakness to red sunlight, kryptonite, magic, and psychic energy. However, he thought that the former 2 were going to be erased even without him, since his Martians were a psychic race undergoing a magic awakening. Once he had pure Kryptonian blood, He then began to fuse it with the blood from his burning Martian's blood. As a result, he mixed those Kryptonian genes with the Martian it came from. Once they were mixed, he modified them to grant the Martian the Kryptonian abilities. He repeated that 50 times until he had 50 label vials that said the name of who they belonged to. This only took him around 2 hours, and once he finished, he summoned his guardian spear from his soul. At this point, the weapon was so saturated in his soul that he suspected the weapon might even become sentient. All right, I believe I'm almost finished. Now, just to peek into the future, Justinian held his spear with both hands as he closed his eyes to view the stream of time. He didn't do this very far as he had no interest in the distant future. He only wanted to know what would happen in the next 5 to 10 minutes. When he did, he saw his honor guard all inject themselves with their serums and successfully assimilate the genetics. The abilities they shared with Kryptonians were enhanced while they gained the special ability to absorb solar radiation, making them even stronger. When he saw that, he knew that it would be worthwhile to also do the same for Tamaranians who had a similar ability to Kryptonians. He pulled himself back from seeing the future before he nodded. He waved his hand, and he caused the 50 vials to enter the hands of those they belonged to. Inject yourselves. One by one, his honor guard stuck needles in their necks, injecting the Kryptonian serums into themselves. Justinian watched as his honor guard didn't struggle as their pure burning Martian genes began to assimilate the Kryptonian genes. With a smile on his face, Justinian knew in the future his Martians would surpass the apex predators of Perpetua. The mix of human and Martian would not match the perfect Kryptonian and Martian mixture. One after the other, his burning Martians opened their eyes after they felt invigorated. Rimnosh raised her hand and clenched her fist, feeling a lot of power coursing through her. Honestly, this is just unfair. Just as 50 could take the league. Justinian shook his head. You guys underestimate yourselves. Just one of you could take on the league. 50 is overkill. Justinian smiled as he began to do the same with the blood from each of them. All 50, which he mixed with the pure Kryptonian genes. He could already do a lot of the stuff Martians could do, but it would not hurt to have their DNA as well. When I finally go after the Terra, you will see how true those words are. Laurelina sat down as she watched her Emperor and God work. What do you plan to do, my Emperor? Good of you to ask. I will have Clarion cast a ritual that will send all of the adults of Terra to another dimension for some time. While the adults are gone, we will gather those under 18 and send them to a school we will build. The Schola Progenium, where we will train those kids to become inquisitors, sisters of battle, imperial assassins, or custodes like me. They can also be trained to be mages, artificers, alchemists, or shapers if they have the talent. We will let the adults return in 3 years when we will be so in control of the planet they will have no choice but to submit. As for the League, we will be ready to ambush them where we will force them to submit. As he finished talking, he picked up a vial that was far more concentrated on burning Martian and Kryptonian DNA. He even added his own perpetual dragon and Custodes blood to the mix. The mixture glowed a violent blue, gold, and purple as he injected it into his neck. He closed his eyes as he could feel the blood serum instantly start spreading through his body. It was sucked into his bone marrow, and just as he expected, his perpetual nature made it seamless. His biomancy activated on its own and allowed the burning Martian and Kryptonian abilities to be seamlessly assimilated into his body. It only took him a few hours, and already he had made himself and his burning Martians even more deadly. He popped his neck as he began to feel himself able to shape-shift and phase through matter, and he also gained an enhanced affinity to fire. Most of these abilities I already had, though having the genes wouldn't hurt. Once he made sure there was no issue in his body or the bodies of his burning Martians, he nodded. We are finished. How we all have the power of the Kryptonians. I will build us a sunroom where we can absorb more solar radiation without the weakness that comes from being a Kryptonian. Sigismund grinned as he knew that he would be an even better swordsman than before. Even the Guardians would fall to his sword when his body would not break, and it would not stop until all his foes were dead. My Emperor, I swear my sword to you. I will claim the head of any that dare oppose your will. Be they guardians, demons, angels, or gods. I will kill them all. Justinian walked over to Sigismund and placed a hand on his shoulder. I expect to see it, my champion. All of you are elites, with more potential in your hands than any other. Don't let it end shamefully. Return to the throne room. Each of them bowed their heads before they began to teleport out of his lab, except Remnosh and Laurelina. They both looked at the Kryptonian clones who were still hooked up to the blood extraction machine. Remonish was quite curious about them. What are you going to do with them? Justinian in his past life as a human seemed like a long-distant past because he had 40,000 years of memories from the 4 Custodes he was named for. He also had some of the Emperor's memories by becoming his heir. But he still remembered that life, and he knew just how many fanfics had Galatea as a lover. When he looked at Galatea, sure, she was attractive, but not as much in his mind. I believe I know why that is. You are part dragon, but you don't have the desire to hoard women like several of my previous hosts. No, you have a desire to hoard power and knowledge. Reminds me of myself, since I was not as driven by females like Drake. It doesn't help that you surround yourself with those 2 hotties. You do like female primarchs, don't you? Sure do. It is just hard to get attracted to normal women. This is a Kryptonian, but to me, she looks plain. Diana, on the other hand, I find very attractive both in personality and looks. But you're willing to let her go for power, for the mother boxer people have. I am. Will you regret it? Maybe I might, but what is the alternative? Me and Albion, let's do it for you. We will invade Themyscira for you. We can act like something unrelated to you. We will raise it to the ground if we have to. All you have to do is act like you want to try to stop us. Even if you destroy our avatars, our true souls are with you in the boosted gear and divine dividing. Think about it. We can make it so Diana won't hate you and deal with the annoying Amazons. Not a bad idea, Drake. What do you think, Justinian? You just let us unleash our rage on the island, and you swoop in acting like a hero. With a growing grin on his face, Justinian liked the sound of that. Drake, Albion, you are geniuses. Remnosh tilted her head. How are those 2 dragons geniuses? Justinian smiled as he explained the plan. Remember my friend Diana. I like her quite a bit, but not enough to let it get in the way of my power. Her people of Themyscira have an apocalyption device called a mother box from the distant past when Darkseid invaded Earth. They left 3 of those, and I planned to assimilate them into my armor, and to do that I was going to invade her people's island with an army of space marines to get it. Instead, Drake and Albion will take their dragon forms, and they will attack the island for me. We let them nearly destroy it, and then we swoop in acting like we're there to save them. While we do that, I will send one or both of you to retrieve the mother box. Laurelina grinned, as that sounded like a great plan. This is a good idea. You told us about her, the daughter of Zeus. One of the old gods, unlike Darkseid, who is a new god. If you do manage to seduce her to your cause, you could secretly take her blood and gain access to those old genes for your clones. Bingo. Good job, Laurelina. You are as pretty as you are smart. When she blushed, the many magic tattoos on her body lit up like a blush. Remnosh rolled her eyes at that. A good idea is a good idea. That reminds me. What will you do about Darkseid when you face him? Justinian merely stabbed his guardian's spear into the ground. I will stab this in his evil heart. The god-killing effect should at least kill that shard of his avatar. Killing the real Darkseid is a distant goal, but we can at least make it painful for him. Justinian would use Drake and Albion's soul, destroying fire and poison, fuse that with his spear's ability to kill gods, and boost a bunch of times. That should leave even Darkseid in agony. In the meantime, he dragged Slade and Roz over to his side. All right, want to help me start making the genetic source for my army of clones? Both of his female primarchs nodded as they walked over to help him in any way they could. CH 37 clone template. As the League gathered at what remained of Arkham Asylum, Batman, who was at the front, turned around to address Diana. Your friend Justinian did this. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Diana was conflicted because she considered Justinian a friend, someone who understood what it meant to be a demigod, someone who was like her more than her friends, but at the same time, she knew Justinian was tempered through wars they could not understand. It had already been months since she had last spoken with her friend, but it was because of him she met her twin brother. She even met with Hephaestus after learning where all male Amazonians went. It caused a big fight between her and her mother Hippolyta. Diana felt it was far too cruel what the Amazons did for centuries, mating with sailors only to kill them and then throwing the male babies into the sea. Hippolyta for a long time allowed that until Hephaestus was the one to change her mind. Now that she had been with her brother for a while, she felt she owed Justinian a debt. She wouldn't blame Justinian yet. How do you know for a fact it was him? Did he admit it himself, or did you see him do this? Batman turned to Cyborg, who answered for him. It's true, Diana. When I and Batman were working on the Batcomputer, Justinian uploaded a virus into it, causing it to crash and transform into a mechanical creature. When we dealt with it, Justinian magically told us to stop trying to make a contingency for him, as Batman has not stopped. He also threatened him that he could end up dead if he did not stop. To me, that pretty much speaks of guilt. Diana sighed, as that was pretty much guaranteeing what she didn't want to know. I see. Superman turned to Batman, as he was one of those who didn't like Batman's contingencies for the League. In a way, I can see why he dislikes you. Even I feel betrayed by your paranoia. Seems like you found your mirror in Justinian. Hearing that instantly made Bruce angry. We are nothing alike. I am not a warlord or a transhuman who has lived longer than human civilization. Justinian is deranged and no different from Darkseid, even if he masks it behind his supposed humanity. If you ask me, there isn't a trace of humanity left in Justinian or the Custodes. Big Barda crossed her arms as she remembered the last time she saw the giant Custodes. She didn't even talk to him when he stopped Clarion the Witch Boy. Then there is also the fact he has the pact with Clarion. For returning his cat, he is owed a favor. Dr. Fate crossed his arms as if that could be anything. Clarion, the number of dark rituals in the mind of a Lord of Chaos, when partnered with a magic user like Justinian, are endless. When I saw Justinian and how he used his magic, I knew he was not using order magic. He is not using chaos magic either, which makes it all the more strange. Justinian doesn't ask or request when he uses magic. He forces it to obey. Giovanni nodded. I noticed that as well. In that fight with Clarion, he used a lot of magic and with no chance. He just brute forced it. I also fear what could Clarion and Justinian do if they decide to use magic to cause lasting damage to us or Earth. Diana shook her head. No, Justinian wouldn't risk anything that would destroy the Earth. He told me about why Terra is so important to him. It is the cradle of mankind. It was where he was born and where he served with loyalty for 10,000 years. He wouldn't damage his home planet like that. He let me know how much he loves the life of Earth. John looked down as he remembered Rimnosh, who mocked him for the wiping of his race. Her entire race had butchered his, and now Justinian was considered their emperor. If he can take over Mars like he did, it means he is preparing for a second invasion, and that is why he needed Clarion's favor. A way to soften Earth for when he arrives in force. Diana looked up at the night sky to where Mars was. When she looked back, she shook her head as she pushed her friendship back to speak rationally. Dr. Fate, would you know any rituals that a Chaos Lord could cast to get an effect like what Justinian would want? Something to keep the planet unharmed while weakening the League or the Earth's defenses. Fate began to ponder that as Nabu was a Lord of Order, not Chaos. Though he still had seen their work in the past. Several, but guessing which one won't help us. We must prepare regardless for his eventual invasion. The League members gathered Batman, Superman, Aquaman, June Johns, Hal Jordan, John Stewart, Big Barda, Diana, Dr. Fate, Giovanni Zatara, Hawkgirl and Hawkman, Cyborg, and several others who were not here would fight to defend Earth. Be they from aliens like the Reach, gods, mages, or conquerors like Darkseid and Justinian. While the League finally designated him an enemy, Justinian in his lab looked toward Terra with a smile. Rimnosh, who saw him looking like that, reached out and held his armored hand. He rarely removed anything other than his helmet. What is wrong? The League has agreed that I am an enemy. They know partially part of my plan to use Clarion. Justinian shook his head as he knew that Diana still held hope, but she would stop him if he tried to invade her home. Though he wasn't going to be doing that himself. Right, my friends? Right. I've been itching for a real fight since I arrived in this reality. In our previous peak, as heavenly dragons, we nearly destroyed the underworld, which is as vast as the earth, if not more. As dragon gods, we can blow up planets and stars with ease, much less when we use our true powers. Justinian shook his head as he hooked Slade and Roz to the same machine. He had the 3 Kryptonian clones hooked up too. He was still collecting their blood, and he would likely keep them like that until he had more than enough of their DNA for his future cloning. The same would go for Slade and Roz, who he planned to use as a template for his clone army, like the Kamino Jango Fett clones. He planned to take the genetics of Roz, who had been modified by his long-term use of the Lazarus Pit, and Slade, who was a super soldier. Once he had a proper genetic template using these two, he planned to add in a diluted genetic mixture from Superboy the clone that had a decent chunk of human DNA. In that way, his future clones would have the best of the genetics of Ra's Al Ghul and his Lazarus Pit enhanced genetics, Slade's super soldier, and some Kryptonians. When he got to work, he repeated his previous work with all 3 genetic sources. In less than an hour, he had a proper genetic template he would be able to use to make his clones. Of course, he was not the one who was going to be in charge of cloning millions of these Slade Roz Connor clones. Instead, he would leave that to a proper cloning facility to make these clones en masse. His Martian Space Marines, like in 40K, were troops meant to fight in the most dangerous of battles. His army of clones would instead serve as the rank and file guardsmen of his Imperium. However, he would need to grant them a name worthy of being the main army for the Great Crusade. They would invade planets for him, while his Martians and any other powerful alien race he managed to subjugate would form his special troops. Justinian smiled to himself at the purified genetic source he would use. Soundwave, automate this process for me. At once, my lord. Soundwave was not just an A.I. that Justinian program for the invincible reason. It was an A.I. assistant like Jarvis meant to make his life easier. With his command, Soundwave used the magic enchantments in the machines to continue to produce more of the template Justinian had created. While that got automated by the helpful A.I., Justinian decided to leave his laboratory for now. Soundwave, make sure these genetic materials stay alive and healthy to keep producing blood for me. Oh, and keep Manbat, Scarecrow, and Killer Croc in stasis until I require them. Of course. From the ceiling, several mechanical limbs dragged away the other prisoners while letting Slade, Roz, and the Kryptonian clones keep making blood. Soundwave hooked them up to several vials that would inject them with vitality potions and blood surge potions to keep them making blood. With that dealt with, Justinian teleported back to his throne room where his honor guard waited. When he arrived, they all bowed to him as he nodded his head to them. When he sat on his throne, he took the time to enter the psychic net rather than just keep a part of his focus on it. He looked through the entire Martian population and what they were thinking. A few Martians here and they're plotted his end, but he just sent a message to his Marines to capture those and drag them to the labs. When the traitors were exposed, he looked through the Research Institute, the many dimensions he had created where massive farms grew more crops and livestock were bred. He even saw his Predacons basking on the surface in the mana-rich surface. After doing that, he opened his eyes as he leaned back into his crystal throne. Laurelina stayed back a bit, as it was Rimnosh who was considered his mate. She walked over and sat on her emperor's lap, who was resting his head on his knuckle. "Are you okay?" Justinian glanced over at her with a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. I am just getting very restless, and I am itching for a fight." Rimnosh cleared her voice as she looked over at Laurelina, who returned to her guard duty for the moment. She smiled as she turned to Justinian. "It has been a while since we slept together. Want to return to the hot spring dimension? Take Laurelina with you. Make a date." Justinian instantly began to feel his draconic desires start to rise to the top. Draig and Albion went silent and dormant, as they were not perverts to look. Regardless, Justinian felt that would be a worthwhile stress reliever, and he was in the mood. Not a bad idea. Rimnosh smiled as she got up, grabbed his hand, and helped him off the throne. Sigismund, who stood closer to the throne, turned to Justinian. My emperor? Are you leaving again? You just got here. Justinian nodded. Yes, I think I'm going to check up on my predicants. I will take Laurelina and Remnosh. While I'm up there, I might as well check up on the farms. Of course. Sigismund and the rest of his honor guard didn't suspect a thing. Instead of doing what he said, he returned to his laboratory and recreated the hot spring realm again, where he released his draconic desires. Laurelina was not expecting that, but when she got started, she went crazy with pleasure and lust. Justinian, as a perpetual custodes with Dragon God, Burning Martian, and Kryptonian genes, needed beyond strong partners. Remnosh and Laurelina were two enhanced Burning Martians with Kryptonian genes, meant they were what he needed. The sheer force of their S*X would have caused massive earthquakes on Mars if not for the dimension that Justinian created. There was a second reason they didn't do this often. Their stamina was effectively endless. However, after a month of the most extreme mating, Justinian had ever had, it finally ended with Remnosh and Laurelina panting while sitting on his lap. As for him, he had a big grin on his face, as this was how an emperor was meant to be treated. I better change my ways. I need regular month-long S*X. It sure relieves my mind of all my pent-up stress. When he looked at Laurelina, he could see her golden eyes were glowing with a bright gold. You are forbidden from writing this in the Bible? She nodded as he established a psychic link with her, as after having S*X with her, she was officially his. Once the link was formed, he stood up in the lake, which went through a beating. All right then, about 30 minutes outside has passed. Are you two up to walk? Remnosh scoffed as she stood up without issue. She was radiant right now, and the reason she and Justinian didn't make much was because of how long it took them to calm down after. Even now, she felt her stamina come back, and if they stayed longer, they would be set off. Though as Laurelina had no mate in her life, this was her first time. She looked up at Justinian with pure desire in her eyes, which made Justinian sigh. Another round? Remnosh sighed as she looked at Laurelina, who was smiling. Fine. With that, Justinian got back into it, since he would be busy with his training. However, S*X with Primarch-sized women was the best, since they were up to his standard in size. He was surely living the high life now as an immortal emperor.